During a heartfelt segment of his show, Steve Harvey receives an unexpected emotional message from Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré. The message, filled with respect, admiration, and raw emotion, catches Harvey off guard, bringing him to tears on live TV. This rare and powerful moment touches the hearts of millions as two influential figures share a deep, unscripted emotional exchange. Steve Harvey walked onto his talk show stage wearing his usual bright smile. The audience clapped and cheered, and Steve, full of energy, launched into the day's topic, the power of purpose. It was supposed to be an ordinary segment. He had just finished sharing a personal story about his struggles growing up in poverty when a production assistant walked briskly toward the stage, whispering something in Steve's ear. Steve looked confused, then surprised, then silent. He turned to the camera, cleared his throat, and said, folks, I've just been told there's a very special message for me, and it's coming from somewhere I never expected. Burkina Faso." The screen behind him lit up with a golden seal and the bold words, "Message from President Ibrahim Traoré." The studio went completely quiet. Not a whisper, not a cough. Steve, now visibly shaken, looked into the camera and said softly, "Why would the president of Burkina Faso want to send me a message? I don't even know what this is about." He sat down, eyes locked on the screen, and then the video began. The video opened with a calm, warm background, a simple wooden desk, a flag of Burkina Faso behind it. Then appeared a man with strong eyes and a gentle voice. "President Ibrahim Traoré." Steve leaned forward, his fingers tightening around the arms of his chair. "Mr. Steve Harvey," the president began in English with a soft African accent. "I speak to you not just as a leader but as a brother." The entire studio leaned in. "You don't know me, but we know you." Traoré continued. "In the villages of Burkina Faso, your voice reaches farther than you may think. Your words of strength, faith, and second chances have touched people you'll never meet." Steve blinked, stunned. His hands began to tremble slightly. Traoré's voice thickened with emotion. "During our darkest nights, when war threatened our peace, your story gave me hope. You reminded me that leadership is not about titles, but about purpose and heart." The room fell into absolute silence. Then Traoré looked directly into the camera and said, "From a soldier who rose to lead his people to a boy who once had nothing in America, I thank you." Steve's lips parted, but no words came out. Only the beginning of tears. For the first time in a long time, Steve Harvey was speechless. He reached for a tissue as the message continued. "I've watched you cry for others, laugh with strangers, give to those who thought they were forgotten." Traoré's voice echoed. "In my country, we know that kind of heart. We call it a heart of the sun. Warm, brave, and giving light." Steve finally whispered, "Wow." The president paused, then continued, "This message is not political. It is personal. I see in you the story of a man who never gave up, and it reminds me to never give up on my people." The message ended with Traoré saying something in Moor, the native language of Burkina Faso. Steve turned to his team, his voice cracking. "What did he say at the end?" A translator nearby stood and replied gently. He said, "Even the strongest man needs to be reminded that his voice still matters." Steve covered his face. The crowd was crying. Even the cameraman's hands were shaking. This wasn't just a TV moment. It was a moment of souls meeting across oceans, across struggle, across brotherhood. And it had only just begun. Steve sat quietly, his hands folded, his eyes glistening. The audience waited, but he couldn't speak. Something heavy had touched his spirit. A weight of truth, of connection, of being seen. After a pause, Steve looked up and said, "You know, you never think that your words go that far. You just try to be real. Try to survive. Try to help." The crowd clapped gently, but Steve raised his hand to stop them. "This ain't about applause," he said. "This is about purpose." Backstage, the producers debated cutting to a commercial. Steve refused. "I want the world to hear every second of this. Don't stop the feed." Then, as the cameras zoomed in on Steve, a second surprise came. A live connection. The screen flickered. Suddenly, President Ibrahim Traoré appeared on video, not pre-recorded this time. Steve gasped. "Mr. Harvey," Traoré said, smiling gently. "For once, let me speak to you. Man to man, not from one country to another, from one dreamer to another." The studio fell silent again. A storm of emotion was rising, and no one was ready for what the president would say next. Traoré leaned in toward the camera, his tone soft and sincere. "You see me now as a president," he said. "But I was once a boy with no shoes. I walked barefoot to school. I carried books tied with string. And many nights, I went to sleep hungry." Steve lowered his head. His shoulders moved as he held back tears. The president continued, "When I was a teenager, I saw war with my own eyes. I saw people give up, but I also saw people rise." He paused, then added something unexpected. "One day in a crowded internet cafe, I saw your video. Don't give up. I didn't even understand all your words, but I understood your tears, your passion, your pain, and your hope." Steve looked up, stunned. "You helped a young boy in Burkina Faso believe he could be more than his pain. And that boy became me." The crowd gasped. Some had tears falling freely. Traoré smiled gently. "So when I heard your voice again last week speaking about purpose, I knew it was time I said something back." Steve covered his face, and that's when Traoré said something even Steve couldn't believe. President Traoré took a deep breath, then looked directly into the camera. "Mr." During a heartfelt segment of his show, Steve Harvey was caught completely off guard when a deeply moving message came in, from none other than the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré. What began as a regular day of inspiring talk transformed into a moment of raw emotion, as admiration and gratitude traveled thousands of miles to find him. The president's words hit Steve like a wave, bringing him to tears in front of millions. It wasn't just a message. It was a soul reaching out to another. Steve started the show the way he always did, bright-eyed and smiling, welcomed by roaring applause. The theme of the day was purpose. He had just finished recounting one of his childhood stories, about growing up poor and learning the value of persistence, when a stage assistant quickly approached him. She leaned in, whispered something, and Steve's smile slowly faded into curiosity, then astonishment. "Ah, folks," he said, clearing his throat, "I've just been told there's a very special message for me. And it's coming from somewhere I never expected. Burkina Faso." Behind him, the screen lit up with the golden seal of the nation and the words, "Message from President Ibrahim Traoré." Silence. The audience froze. Not even a cough. Steve sat down slowly, clearly stunned. "Why would the president of Burkina Faso want to talk to me?" he murmured, honestly baffled. The lights dimmed slightly, and the video began. It was a calm, minimalist setting. A wooden desk, the flag of Burkina Faso behind it. Then the president appeared, calm eyes, humble expression, and a voice full of depth. "Mr. Steve Harvey," he began with a smooth African accent, "I speak not only as a president, but as a brother. You don't know me, but we know you," he said. "In the villages of Burkina Faso, your voice travels further than you'll ever know. Your stories of strength, of faith, of second chances, have touched lives you'll never meet." Steve leaned forward. His hands began to shake. President Traoré continued, voice now thick with emotion. "In our darkest moments, during war, unrest, uncertainty, your words reminded me that real leadership is rooted in purpose. Not power. Not fame. But heart." And then came the line that pierced through the air like a prayer. From a soldier who rose to lead his people, to a boy who had nothing in America. "I thank you." Steve was speechless. He reached for a tissue as the message continued. "I've seen you give, cry for others, laugh with strangers. In my country, we call that the heart of the sun. A heart that warms. A heart that gives light." Steve whispered, "Wow." Then the president added, "This is not a political message. It's personal. I see in you a man who never gave up, and it reminds me not to give up on my people." The video ended with President Traoré saying something in more Burkina Faso's native language. "What did he say?" Steve asked, his voice cracking. A translator replied softly. He said, "Even the strongest man needs to be reminded that his voice still matters." Steve covered his face. The cameraman's hands were visibly trembling. This wasn't just a talk show. This was a bridge, soul to soul. Steve took a deep breath. "You never think your words go that far," he said. "You just try to be real. Try to survive. Try to help." He motioned for the audience to stop clapping. "This ain't about applause," he said. "This is about purpose." Backstage, the producers debated cutting to commercial. "Don't stop the feed," Steve said. "Let it play." And then, live, President Traoré reappeared. This time, not a pre-recorded message. A live feed. "Mr. Harvey," he said, smiling gently. "Let me speak to you. Not from one country to another, but one dreamer to another." The studio held its breath. "You see me now as a president," he said. "But I was once a boy with no shoes. I walked barefoot to school. My books were tied with string. I went to bed hungry more nights than I care to remember." Steve's head lowered. His shoulders moved slightly as he held back tears. "I saw war. I saw despair," Traoré continued. "But I also saw hope. And one day, in a crowded internet cafe, I watched your video, 'Don't Give Up.' I didn't understand all the words, but I understood your tears. Your fire. Your hope." Steve looked up, tears in his eyes. "You helped a boy in Burkina Faso believe he could be more than his pain. That boy became me." Gasps swept the room. People cried openly. "And when I heard your voice again last week," Traoré said, "I knew it was time to speak back." And then, he said something that truly shattered Steve. "Mr. Harvey," he said, "you once said you wanted to come to Africa, not as a celebrity, but as a brother. Someone who wanted to give back." Steve nodded slowly. "I did." "Well," the president said, smiling, "I invite you to Burkina Faso, not for press, not for spotlight, but to see what your voice has built in silence." The studio gasped. Steve's hands trembled. "There's an orphanage in Ouagadougou," the president said. "The children there know your name. They pray using your words. They laugh with your stories. But most of all, they believe they matter, because you mattered." Steve stood. The audience stood with him. Soft clapping. Some crying. And in 7 days, Traoré added, they'll be waiting in the village square. Waiting to meet the man whose voice crossed oceans and healed hearts. The countdown had begun. Next morning, Steve packed. No cameras. No entourage. Just a small bag and a heart full of questions. News outlets ran the story everywhere. But Steve wasn't going for the headlines. He was going for the children. For that voice that echoed in him still. On the plane, he stared out at the clouds and whispered, "God, why me?" In Burkina Faso, President Traoré stood in a sunlit courtyard. Before him, a sea of children. "He's coming," he said. They cheered. A small girl in the back clutched a notebook. Her name was Acha. She whispered, "Will he read it? Will he care?" A caretaker smiled. "He's already cared more than most." In her letter, Acha wrote, "Dear Mr. Steve, my name is Acha. My papa died. My mama is sick. I cry at night. But someone played your video. You said we were born for greatness. I believed you. Thank you for speaking to us, even if you didn't know we were listening." As sunset kissed the rooftops of Ouagadougou, Acha sat under a mango tree, notebook to chest. This wasn't fame. This was destiny. Steve stepped off the plane. No parade. No crowd. Just one sign, "Welcome, Brother Steve." He rode through the city. Children waved from dusty roads. And at the orphanage gates, over 100 kids held signs. You matter. Thank you, Mr. Steve. We love you. President Traoré embraced him. Welcome home. ACHA stepped forward, notebook shaking in her hands. This is for you, she whispered. Steve knelt. Read her words. And wept. Everyone watching knew this wasn't a visit. It was a divine reunion. Backstage, during a break, a producer handed Steve a paper. There's one more part of the message, she whispered. Steve, read. When I was a boy hiding under my grandmother's market stall, she listened to your voice on a crackling radio. She didn't understand English. But you made her smile. He covered his mouth. That voice raised the president. Mr. Harvey, the president said, you once said you wanted to visit Africa, not as a celebrity, but as a brother, someone ready to give back. Steve nodded gently, voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I did. Traoré smiled warmly. Then let me invite you, personally, to Burkina Faso. Not for the cameras. Not for a photo op. But to see what your voice has built, quietly, across the ocean. The studio gasped. You've lifted spirits halfway across the world. Now let me show you what seeds you've sown in our soil. Steve's hands began to shake. He didn't know if he should speak or let the tears speak for him. Then Traoré said what broke him. There's an orphanage in Ouagadougou. The children there know your name. They say your words when they pray. They giggle at your jokes. But most of all, they believe they matter, because you mattered. Steve stood slowly, eyes glassy with tears. The audience stood with him, gentle applause filling the air. Some wiped their own tears. But the president wasn't done. In 7 days, they'll be in the village square, waiting. Waiting to meet the man whose voice crossed oceans and healed hearts. The countdown had begun. By sunrise, Steve was already packing. No entourage. No publicity. Just a carry-on and a heart full of questions. The world buzzed. Headlines lit up every major network. President of Burkina Faso brings Steve Harvey to tears, a message that touched the world. But Steve didn't go for the headlines. He went for the children. For that quiet call that echoed in his soul. On the flight across the Atlantic, Steve sat quietly, gazing out at the clouds. His mind drifted to Cleveland. To hunger. To nights spent dreaming of a life that seemed unreachable. God, he whispered. Why me? He didn't know what to expect. Would they know him? Would he be strong enough for them? Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, in a sun-warmed courtyard, President Traoré addressed a crowd of excited children. He's coming, he said, smiling. The kids cheered. But one small girl, toward the back, had tears in her eyes. She held a notebook close. Her name was ACHA. She was 10. Small, soft-spoken, eyes older than her years. The notebook shook in her hands. Will he read it? Will he care? She whispered to her caretaker. The woman knelt beside her, smiling kindly. He already does. More than most. ACHA's letter was short, but vast in feeling. Dear Mr. Steve. My name is ACHA. My papa died 2 years ago. My mama is very sick. Sometimes I cry when it's dark. One day, someone played your video. You said we are meant to do great things. I believed you. Thank you for speaking to us, even when you didn't know we were listening. I hope you smile when you see us. Your little sister. ACHA. As the sun dropped over Ouagadougou, children rehearsed songs. Others drew pictures. Hope filled the air like music. And ACHA sat under a mango tree, notebook pressed to her chest. This wasn't about fame. This was about a man who once lived in a car. Meeting a child who sometimes slept without dinner. The sky seemed to whisper. They were meant to find each other. By afternoon, the plane touched down on a dusty runway. Steve stepped out, shielding his eyes from the blazing sun. No paparazzi. No press. Just a few guards, 2 translators, and a young aide holding a sign. "Welcome, Brother Steve." His heart pounded. The drive through the streets was quiet. Simple homes. Tiny market stalls. Children waving excitedly. And when they reached the orphanage gates, Steve wasn't ready. Over 100 children stood there, holding signs. "You matter, thank you, Mr. Steve, that we love you." Tears filled his eyes. President Traoré stepped forward, not in a suit, but in a white shirt and traditional cloth. He wrapped Steve in a tight embrace. "Welcome home." Steve couldn't respond. Then, a voice from the crowd. "Steve! Steve!" It was ACHA. She walked slowly forward, clutching her notebook. "This is for you," she whispered. Steve knelt. He opened the letter. He read every word. Then wept, without restraint. Everyone there knew, this wasn't just a visit. It was a divine meeting. Back in the studio, during a short break, Steve sat frozen. The video of the president's message had just finished. A producer approached, handing him a sheet. "This part wasn't in the original message," she whispered. Steve read it aloud, voice trembling. "When I was a boy, hiding under the wooden table of my grandmother's market stall, she would laugh as she listened to your voice on an old crackling radio. She didn't know English, but your spirit made her smile." He lowered the paper and covered his mouth. Because that voice helped raise a leader. His voice cracked. He couldn't hold it in. The camera was still rolling, but Steve didn't even try to smile. He looked straight into the lens and whispered, "This world, it's so much smaller than we think. And our words, they go further than we'll ever know." The studio was silent. You could feel hearts beating. But for Steve, this moment was just the start of something bigger. As the segment ended, Steve stepped off the stage, still gripping ACHA's letter. He was supposed to meet the next guest. He couldn't. Something inside him pulled harder than duty. He slipped into his dressing room and grabbed his phone. "Call the team," he said. "I want to speak to President Traoré. Today." The producer blinked. "Yes, sir. I'll set it up right now." 2 hours later, a secure Zoom link connected, and there he was. President Ibrahim Traoré. Calm. Warm. Eyes carrying the weight of a nation and the tenderness of a friend. Steve's voice trembled. "Mr. President. I'm just a comedian from Cleveland. I never thought, never imagined my voice would reach someone like you." Traoré smiled. "And I'm just a soldier who loves his people. But even soldiers need hope. And you gave me that." Steve leaned closer. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Traoré said gently, "come to Burkina Faso. Even if just for one day. There's someone I want you to meet." Steve froze. He didn't know it then, but that one sentence would change everything. That night, he barely slept. The invitation looped in his mind. But one line from ACHA's letter haunted him more. "That voice helped raise me." He thought about his own mother. The one who told him he could be somebody, even when the world told him he couldn't. He remembered something else too. A prayer. Years ago, when things were falling apart, Steve had looked up and said, "God, if I ever get famous, let my words mean something to someone who really needs them." And now this. He couldn't hold it in. That night, Steve went live, not with jokes or suits, but with truth. He held up the translated letter and looked into the camera. "Y'all, I've had a good life. Fame, success, money, but this letter, from a leader I've never met. From a child raised by a grandmother who didn't even speak my language but felt my heart. That's God." He paused. "I once made a promise. And I'm keeping it." Right then and there, Steve made the decision. He was going to Burkina Faso. Not for TV. Not for content. but for something bigger. When he boarded the plane, Steve brought no press, no cameras. Just his assistant, a translator, and a notebook he hadn't touched in years. He sat by the window, holding the letter in his lap. One line circled in red ink. "I wish my mother could have seen the man you helped me become." It echoed inside him. "What did I do," he whispered, "to deserve this kind of honor?" Mid-flight, his assistant handed him a small envelope. A wax seal. Inside, another note. "When you land, don't think like a celebrity. Think like a son coming home." Steve pressed the letter to his heart. He didn't know what he would find there. But something told him, this wasn't just about a thank you. This was healing. The plane landed at sunrise. No red carpet. No reporters. Just 2 SUVs and one tall figure near the stairs. President Ibrahim Traoré. Steve walked slowly down the steps, unsure of what to say. Traoré didn't wait. He hugged him. No press. No speeches. Just an embrace. "You came," the president said. "I had to," Steve replied. They drove through the quiet city. Dusty roads. Children waving. Signs drawn in crayon with Steve's name. But their first stop wasn't the palace. It was a market. Simple tables. Fruits. Spices. Colorful cloth. Traoré walked Steve to the back. He pointed to a weathered, broken-down stall. "This," he said, "was my grandmother's place." He knelt. Picked up a small stone. "Right here is where I listened to you on a crackling radio while she counted coins." He placed the stone in Steve's palm. "This is where hope began." Steve broke. No cameras. Just tears. Then came another stop. A village. Quiet. Humble. Women waited under a tree. One stepped forward, slow-moving, gentle hands. "This is Awa," Traoré said. "The last woman alive who used to sit beside my grandmother at the market." "She remembers you," Traoré said. Steve looked puzzled. "But how?" Traoré smiled. "They may not have understood your English. But they felt your joy." He looked at Awa. "She used to say, 'That man has a heart louder than his tongue.'" Awa stepped forward. The translator leaned in, listening closely. "She says, you made the hard days easier. My sister, my grandmother, used to say your voice gave her strength to keep selling, even when she felt like giving up." Steve knelt, eyes filled with tears. Awa gently placed her hand on his cheek and whispered something and more. The translator's voice cracked as she said, "If my sister had met you, she would have fed you. She would have called you her son." In that moment, Steve wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't famous. He was simply a son, being welcomed home by a mother he never knew he had. And the world watched, completely still. That evening, Steve visited a small local school. No cameras. No lights. Just soft drums, shy children, and a humble stage. As he entered, the kids began singing a soft tune and more. The translator leaned in. That song, it was hummed by President Traoré's grandmother while she cooked at the market. These kids now sing it to honor her. Steve's body froze. "I know this," he whispered. "My grandma in Cleveland. She used to hum this when I cried." Traoré stood beside him. "Our grandmothers gave us the same comfort. Miles apart. Same love." Steve sat down on a simple bench. A little girl approached and handed him a wooden carving, 2 hands holding a heart. Steve broke. He wept. Loudly. Unapologetically. It wasn't just tears, it was years of pain, confusion, longing. Released in a place he never saw coming. 2 boys, one from Ohio, the other from Ouagadougou, had become 2 men bound by more than heritage. They were bound by grief, love, and memory. This wasn't a scripted story. This was something divine. Before Steve flew home, President Traoré asked to meet once more. He led Steve to a quiet patch of land just outside the capital. A single tree stood in the center. Sunflowers surrounded its base. Tro handed Steve a rolled-up certificate, tied with a red ribbon. "This land," he said, "now belongs to you. A place of peace. A gift from Burkina Faso. So whenever you feel tired, whenever the world gets too heavy, you'll have a home here." Steve shook his head, overwhelmed. "I didn't come for gifts. I came because your letter made me feel human again." Tro nodded. "And you made my people feel seen. That's worth more than gold." They stood quietly beneath the tree. The breeze was gentle. Then, something happened that no one expected. Tro knelt, placed his hand on Steve's heart. "I don't kneel for many," he said, "but I kneel for hearts that change lives." Steve knelt, too. Two men, leaders in their own right, cried like sons who missed their grandmothers. And in each other, they found healing. The next day, Steve returned to the U.S. No press. No fanfare. He didn't want it. Something inside him had changed. When he walked back on stage, his show resumed like always. But this time, before saying a word, he carried the children's gift, the carving of two hands holding a heart. He placed it gently on his desk. Then looked into the camera. "In my life, I've received a lot, awards, honors, praise. But this," he motioned to the carving, "this is the greatest gift I've ever known." His voice cracked. "I met a man. Not just a president, but a man of heart. Ibrahim Traoré reminded me of what I forgot, that love, memory, and honor are worth more than anything fame can ever give." He paused. "He called me a son of Africa. I call him my brother." And then, something extraordinary. Steve played the recording of the children's song. No subtitles. No explanation. Just innocent voices. Millions watched. Millions wept. The comments rolled in from around the world. People didn't see countries. They saw love. They didn't see fame. They saw family. They didn't hear language barriers. They heard legacy. "Dear viewers," Steve said softly, "if this story touched your heart, even just a little, please like this video, subscribe, and comment just one word, healed." He smiled through tears. Let's spread that feeling. One story. One tear. One heart at a time.